Hi, my name is Margaret Eddy. I need to put together some PLAs for music theory 1 and 2, so I thought probably the fastest way of doing that would actually be just to videotape myself explaining these things because I teach piano. So I've talked over these concepts a lot with my students, and for me, talking is faster than writing everything down. So I'm supposed to, first of all, the first thing on this list here is to demonstrate understanding of the fundamental elements of music notation, including staff, meter, key, signature, rhythmic and pitch notation, dynamic, and articulation symbols. Okay, so I'm going to first start with staff. So this is my staff here that I've got. It's 5 lines, and it took them a long time to come up with the staff notation way back when. But they have, to start with, they have this line connecting them that's called a bracket, and that indicates that these are the notes that are going to be playing at the same time. So like in this case, we're just doing piano. So I only need to connect 2 because I use the treble clef and the bass clef. And the treble clef is centered around this G line here. And it kind of twists around like this. And then it goes up and then down through and around. And then the bass clef is centered on this F line. Well, not centered, but it starts on this F line when you draw it. And it goes around like this, and then the 2 dots are on either side of that F line, the 4th line. And then the bracket, which looks like this, tells you that this is all the piano playing. So like in violin, they'd only have treble clef, so there wouldn't be a bracket, or the bracket would just have that one line. But in piano, you play 2 stabs at once, or 2 staves at once. So it has all of this in a brace. And sometimes I've played piano music where it actually connected, it had 4 lines connected down, and it would connect actually the whole thing because it was going, it was a Rachmaninoff prelude in C sharp minor, and it was going from way down low to way up high, so they actually just connected 4 lines and did the bass, 2 bass clef, 2 treble clef, and wrote them all across all 4 lines just for this ease of not having to switch between the bass and treble all the time. That's unusual though. Usually when you see that many, like 4 lines all connected together, you've got the tenor and bass on one line and the soprano and alto on another line and then the piano accompaniment underneath or something like that. So then that would all be connected. You'd have the soprano, alto, tenor, bass lines maybe even separate. And then you'd have the piano lines would both be together. The whole thing would have a bracket line connecting them, but then there'd only be a brace line on the individual parts. So that's kind of the very beginnings of notation. And then you've got the actual notes themselves, which is kind of, this is getting into the pitch notation and rhythm notation. So the bottom line in the treble clef is E. So it goes E, G, B, D, and then the top line is F. And people have different ways of remembering this. I remember it by going Eddie girls bake delicious food. More commonly it's every good bird does fine, but because my family's the Eddie family, and us girls like to cook, we do every girl bakes delicious food. Eddie girls bake delicious food because it's easier for us to remember that one. And you have 4 things to remember when you're learning piano because you've got the spaces and the lines for the treble clef and then the spaces and the lines for the bass clef. So that one just makes that one easy. And then for the spaces, you've got those, that covers the line notes. You've got every girl bakes delicious food. And then for the spaces, you've got F, A, C, E, which spells face. And for my students, I tell them your face is towards the top of your body, obviously. So F-A-C-E is in the treble clef, the top line. And then in the bass clef, you've got all cows eat grass, because cows eat grass with their heads down near the earth. So that's the bass clef. All cows eat grass. And then you've got great big dogs fight animals for the bass clef. I like to learn them by their locations. So I'd have bottom line G, fourth line F for the bass clef, bottom line E for the treble clef, second line G, and so forth. Because then when I see the second line in the treble clef, I just think G immediately instead of having to think through the whole acrostic thing. That helps me because I sight read a lot for choirs and stuff, so I can't take the time to read up every single line, think through the acrostic for every single note. I would never be able to keep up with them. So I think of it more that way, and also I think in chords a lot, which helps, but we haven't got there yet. So you've got these different ways of notating it, and you'll notice if you take these and stack them every other, you've got G, A, B, C, D. It goes through the alphabet up to G because it doesn't go farther than G. So that's basically how you notate the notes themselves. And then how you write those notes is actually a rhythmic notation. How they come out, these look like all whole notes right now because whole notes are just, they're just a circle, an empty circle. See that? An empty circle. If you get a half note, it's going to be an empty circle with a line on it. In this case, the line is going down on the left side because it's above the middle line. If you get below the middle line, it's going to be an empty note with the line, the stem going up on the right side. You see it swaps for which side. And I think the idea was behind doing that to keep the stems from tangling with each other once you get more than one staff. So that's how you write half notes. We already talked about whole notes. Those are just big empty circles that we had over here. And then, so these equal like 4 beats. The whole notes equal 4 beats. The half notes equal 2. And then you've got quarter notes equal 1 beat each. And they are just like half notes, but they're filled in. And so middle line and below, the stem goes down. And above, middle line and below the stem goes, middle line and above, sorry. The stem goes down. So like this one, I shouldn't have started on the middle line. That was confusing. So that one, the stem would go down. If you're below the middle line, then the stem is going to go up. So those are all quarter notes. They each equal 1 beat. 1 count. And then the other one, then you start subdividing beats, which gets a little more confusing. So like if you cut whole notes in half, you get half notes, which is 4 beats and then 2 beats. And then you cut 2 beats in half and you have 1 beat each, which is quarter notes. And then you cut those in half and you get eighth notes, which are each going to equal half a beat. And there's a couple of different ways of counting this. Some people do it like peanut, 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 or something like that, where they actually count it with some other word that the syllables feel that way. I just go 1 and 2 and 3 and, because I think more numerically than in other words. So I just go 1 and then I don't lose track of which beat of the measure I'm in, which kind of matters when you're getting into meters, because like we'll talk about later, simple meter versus compound meter, simple duple meter versus compound duple meter. Those kinds of things. I like to know where the core beat is, because when I'm sight reading or performing, I will bring that out. It gets more stress usually. And if not, then it's a syncopation. And then, anyway, that's a whole different ballgame. But it does affect things. So I like to keep track of my numbers. I like to know what number I'm on, and if I'm in a subdivision of a beat, that's if it's like a 1 and or a 1e and a, where it's in the middle, or if it's actually on the beat itself. Because if it's on the beat itself, it's going to get more value than one that's just thrown in there, like 1e and a. The 1 is going to be more valuable than the e and a. And the and is actually going to be more valuable than the E or the so usually. So I like to keep track of those. Anyway, that was a sidetrack, but this is an eighth note. And these are how they look separately. And then you can have them with the tail doing different things. So they don't have to have their tails connected. Like if we were doing a note down here and the tail was going up, then it would just be hanging down and so forth. Can you see that? Yeah. So that affects things where depending on what note you're trying to write, what note, how much value it gets what note you're trying to write pitch-wise will determine what line or space it's on. But the rhythmic notation is going to actually affect more what that note looks like than anything else. Because a whole note looks completely different than an eighth note or a 16th note or a 32nd note. It's pretty much, at this point, you just keep adding tails. So you've got let's say you've got this note here, where you have the stem going down because it's above the middle line, and it's a black note because and now we start adding tails. So this is a quarter note, cut that in half and it's an eighth note, cut it in half again, and it's a 16th note. I think actually the tails would go this direction if we were being like really finicky. The tails go inside. See if I can find an example of that somewhere. Like these ones are all connected, so I don't know if that helps any, but sometimes you can connect tails between the staves and so forth. There's not a lot of only 16th notes where it's just one lone 16th notes. Mostly, yeah, like here. This is probably the closest thing we're going to get to it in the music I've got here. But it's got this 16th note which goes that way. And then